In January, Congress declined to allocate funds President Trump requested for a border wall. In response, he shut down the government for a month, backed down, signed a compromise spending bill with no wall money, and then declared a state of emergency, trying to use extraordinary measures to reallocate funds towards barrier construction. Critics cried foul. Some called it illegal and unconstitutional, because the situation at the southern border isn't actually an emergency. It's clearly not, but Trump's declaration was legal. That doesn't mean anything he tries to do under the state of emergency is automatically legal. His proposal to shift military funds to a non-military purpose probably isn't, but the declaration itself is. It's also wrong, an abuse of power, and an impeachable offense. Congress should quickly pass a bill ending this state of emergency, and revise emergency statutes to make this sort of abuse less likely. The National Emergencies Act of 1976, NEA, grants the executive branch special powers in emergency situations. Essentially, Congress gave the president the ability to, in special circumstances, act without Congress's permission. Presidents have invoked the NEA 58 times. 31 remain in effect today. Almost all of them concern foreign policy, with 50 imposing continuing sanctions and freezing assets. For example, in 1990 George H.W. Bush issued an executive order blocking Iraqi government property and prohibiting transactions with Iraq after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. In 1998, Bill Clinton did the same with Serbia in response to violence in Kosovo. The other 8 emergency declarations concern proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the September 11 attacks, Hurricane Katrina, and the 2009 H1N1 swine flu pandemic. Maybe you'd dispute that some of these qualify as emergencies. But do you know who determines whether something is an emergency? The president. That's why Trump's declaration is legal. The law does not specify when the president can use it. Technically, if the president says it's an emergency, then it's an emergency. Trump is president and he said the situation at the southern border is an emergency, so as far as the law is concerned, it is. But legal doesn't equal right. When Congress gave presidents the power to declare emergencies, it wasn't offering a blank check. Every law comes with the presumption of good faith. In most cases, it's impossible to delineate, in advance, every possible scenario a law does and does not cover. Therefore, laws rely on reasonable interpretation. In this context, the key word is emergency. Hypothetically, if a president woke up with bedhead, declared it a national emergency, and started imposing sanctions on countries with good hair, that wouldn't be reasonable. But it would probably be legal under the NEA. Emergencies are serious, usually unexpected problems that require immediate solutions. Emergency declarations are for urgent challenges that cannot be solved through normal channels. The U.S.-Mexico border does not qualify. For one, the situation has improved quite a bit. According to the Customs and Border Protection Agency, CBP, apprehensions at the border, which the CBP uses to estimate illegal crossings, have fallen dramatically, from over 1.6 million in 2000 to less than 400,000 in 2018. Additionally, the Trump administration's words and actions indicate there's no emergency. In Trump's first 2 years in office, when his party controlled both houses of Congress, the president didn't push for a bill on immigration or border security, preferring to prioritize health care and taxes. He publicly discussed invoking the NEA for months. And after he declared the emergency, he flew to his private resort in Florida. None of that is the behavior of someone who believes the problem is so pressing that normal rules have to be set aside to address it immediately. President Trump admitted as much. When announcing the emergency declaration, he responded to a reporter's question with, "I didn't need to do this. But I'd rather do it much faster. I just want to get it done faster. If he didn't need to, then it's not an emergency." Saying there's no emergency doesn't mean there's nothing for the government to address. Millions of people are in the U.S. without legal status, though more enter legally and overstay their visas than illegally cross the border. Some illicit drugs come to the U.S. from Mexico, though primarily smuggled through legal points of entry, as well as via air, sea, and tunnels, which a wall wouldn't address. Any violent crime is a problem, though immigrants commit fewer violent crimes, on average, than native-born citizens. There are violent gangs with presences in both the United States and Central America, though there's no evidence their members cross the border in places Trump wants to wall, and MS-13, the president's go-to example, originated in Los Angeles and expanded south, not the other way around. Gangs, violent crime, drugs, illegal immigration, and border security are all reasonable issues to care about, but that doesn't make them emergencies. Anti-Democrats tempted to exploit Trump's precedent. The same is true of climate change, gun violence, and healthcare. In fairness, with the exceptions of September 11, Hurricane Katrina, and swine flu, most of the 58 emergency declarations don't look like immediate crises either. On at least some of the 50 sanctions-related declarations, there was probably time to pass laws through Congress. This demonstrates that Congress has ceded power to the White House, but it doesn't justify declaring the wall an emergency. Sanctions are foreign policy, where Congress tends to defer to the president, and few opposed economic penalties against, say, ethnic cleansers in Serbia. Congress has de facto accepted sanctions as a reasonable use of the NEA. By contrast, the wall is a large domestic infrastructure project. It'll take years to build and, unlike sanctions, requires eminent domain land seizures and taxpayer funds. It doesn't fit the common definition of emergency, nor the precedents set by previous emergency declarations. By invoking emergency powers in response to a non-emergency, Trump is abusing his power, even if the declaration of emergency itself isn't illegal. Abuses of power are often legal. If one does not have the power, then one cannot abuse it. But impeachable offenses are not limited to illegal acts. Article 2 of the Constitution says the President shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, which means the President violates the Constitution when he does not. Abuse of power was part of the impeachment cases against both Nixon and Clinton, and not exclusively in reference to illegal activity. Trump has abused his power numerous times in technically legal ways. The president unilaterally imposed tariffs on goods from China, Canada, Europe, and elsewhere, even though the Constitution grants Congress the power to regulate trade. However, U.S. trade laws give the president national security exemptions, and, as with the NEA, the president determines when there's an emergency. Calling China's trade practices an emergency threat is a stretch. Canada's definitely aren't. Congress has let these and other abuses go, which is why it's so important to act in response to the latest declaration of emergency. Every abuse of power Trump gets away with encourages more. Opponents plan to sue, but Congress is the more appropriate venue. The judiciary primarily determines what is technically legal, not what is faithfully executed, and prefers to stay out of legislative v. executive checks and balances disputes. Responding to technically legal abuses of presidential power is Congress's job. In this way, the Trump presidency is like a stress test for American democracy, revealing where Congress has ceded too much power to the executive, and where we rely too much on norms rather than laws. It might have to wait until he's out of office, but the legislature should reclaim some of the powers it gave up. For now, a veto-proof bipartisan supermajority in Congress should end the state of emergency over the U.S.-Mexico border. Anything less would weaken checks and balances, undermine American democracy, and set a terrible precedent encouraging future abuses of power. A lot more than a border wall is at stake.